Caleb Sterling stood on the sun-bleached wooden platform of the Missoula station. The year was 1888. The Montana air was thin and sharp. It tasted of pine needles and distant snow. He had come to meet a woman he had never seen. He had paid for her passage with the last of his savings. He had bought a bride to save a dying ranch and a broken heart. Before the afternoon ended, his world would tilt on its axis. A stranger would step off the train. She would tell him he had bought the wrong bride. Before we begin, tell us where you are listening from today. Then stay with Caleb and Martha to the very end of the trail. The sun hung heavy in a vast, unblinking sky. It radiated a deceptive warmth against Caleb's broad, weary shoulders. Inside, he felt a winter that refused to melt. The warmth of the mountain afternoon could not reach his spirit. He gripped a bouquet of wild pink bitterroot flowers. They were translucent and fragile in the harsh light. He had gathered them at dawn near the churning river. The dew had been a silver coat over the earth then. Now the flowers were beginning to wilt. They bowed their heads in the dry, thin air. Beside him stood his 6-year-old daughter, Rosie. She was a small, quiet ghost of the woman he had lost. She wore her best Sunday dress of faded calico. The sleeves were too short for her growing arms. Her small, dirt-smudged hand was tucked into his calloused palm. She was his anchor in a world of shifting shadows. Caleb adjusted his sweat-stained hat. He smoothed a dark vest that lacked a grease stain.
He was a man carved by the Bitterroot Valley itself. The last 2 years had been a brutal lesson in humility. The big die-up of 1886 had nearly finished him. History would remember that winter as a frozen hell on the plains. Tens of thousands of cattle had died across the northern ranges. They were frozen upright in the drifting snow. The big die-up had turned dreams into white graveyards. When the thaw finally came, the land was littered with bone. Caleb called it the end of hope. It left the rolling hills eerily quiet. It left his pockets empty and his heart hollow. The silence of the hills was a physical weight. His wife, Sarah, had been taken by the fever 3 years ago. The ranch needed a woman's hand to survive. Rosie needed a mother's heart to grow. So Caleb had spent his final dollars on letters and a ticket. He was expecting a woman named Abigail. She was a schoolteacher from the crowded streets of St. Louis. The train whistle shrieked in the far distance. It was a lonely, piercing sound. It echoed off the jagged granite peaks of the Sapphire Mountains. The Northern Pacific engine rounded the rocky bend. It was a black iron beast breathing fire and soot. It belched obsidian smoke into the perfect blue canopy. Rosie jumped on the wooden boards of the platform. Her eyes were wide with a desperate, heartbreaking hope. "Is she here, Papa?" she asked. Her voice trembled like a leaf in a mountain storm. "Is the new lady finally coming home with us?"
Caleb swallowed a hard, dry lump of anxiety. "I reckon so, honey," he whispered. His heart hammered against his ribs with a sharp doubt. The train slowed with a deafening metallic screech. The platform shook under the weight of the iron giant. Steam hissed violently from the undercarriage. It was a white shroud that engulfed their boots. People began to descend into the wild land. It was a parade of strangers seeking fortune or escape. He saw a family with 3 rowdy, soot-covered boys. Then he saw her. She stood framed in the door of the passenger car. She was a portrait of quiet, stubborn defiance. She did not look like the pale woman in the photograph. The Abigail he expected was fragile. She was a flower that might break in a Montana breeze. This woman was tall and strong. She stood with a spine made of mountain pine. Her dark curly hair escaped the confines of a modest bonnet. She wore a simple blue travel dress of heavy wool. It was coated in the fine gray dust of 1,000 miles. Her eyes were the color of the Clark Fork River after rain. They were gray, deep, and filled with intelligence. She surveyed the peaks as if measuring her own strength. Then, her gaze landed on Caleb. She looked at the small girl clinging to his leg. She stepped down the iron stairs with a steady grace. She carried a single wooden trunk with scarred iron clasps. Caleb walked forward on legs that felt like lead. He held out the wilting pink bitterroots.
It was a peace offering to a complete stranger. "Miss Abigail?" he asked. His voice cracked under the weight of the moment. The woman stopped. Her boots came to a rest in the thick Montana dust. She looked at the pathetic flowers in his shaking hand. She looked at the rugged man whose face was a map of winters. She looked at the little girl who was praying for a miracle. A shadow of profound regret flickered across her face. She didn't reach for the flowers. She reached for a steadying breath instead. "I am not Abigail," she said. Her voice was rich and steady, like a low cello note. Caleb froze. The air turned to ice in his lungs. The bustle of the station faded into a muffled roar. "Where is Abigail?" he finally managed to ask. His world was tilting, sliding away from him. Martha Vance looked down at her scuffed leather boots. "She didn't come, Mr. Sterling. She reached the station in St. Louis, and she broke. She looked at the map of the West and feared the silence. She said she couldn't live where the wind never stops." Caleb felt a cold weight sink into his stomach. He had spent his final savings on a ghost. The flowers in his hand felt like a mocking gesture. Martha looked up at him with burning gray eyes. She was going to throw the ticket into the mud.
The conductor barely glanced at the name on the paper. To him, I was only another tired woman heading west. I stood there with nothing but that trunk and my dignity. I refused to begin a new life with another lie. I had already lived that way once before. I had lost my position at the textile mill. I had no kin left in this world to claim me. I told her I would take her place on that iron horse. I told her I wasn't afraid of the silence or the mountains. She looked him directly in the eye. She refused to flinch or turn away. "You bought the wrong bride, sir," she said. "I am a stranger who stole a seat to find a reason to breathe. I will understand if you tell me to leave right now. I can sit on this platform and wait for the return train." She stood there, brave and utterly alone. She was a woman with nowhere left to go. But Caleb saw the subtle tremor in her hands. He saw the fear she fought so hard to hide from the world. She had gambled her entire future on the kindness of a stranger. Rosie peeked out from behind Caleb's heavy trousers. She looked at the dusty blue dress and the kind face. "Do you know how to braid hair?" Rosie asked. The question was small and filled with fragile hope. It shattered the suffocating tension of the afternoon. Martha knelt down right there in the Missoula dust. She ignored the grime on her skirts. She brought herself to eye level with the motherless child. "I do," Martha whispered. A genuine smile touched her lips for the first time.
"I can do a French braid or a crown for a princess," Rosie smiled back. It was a beam of pure sunlight through a stormy sky. It was the first time she had smiled at a stranger in years. Caleb had almost forgotten what that smile looked like. For months, Rosie had spoken only when she needed something. She no longer chased butterflies. She no longer laughed at the calves stumbling across the pasture. Since Sarah died, the little girl had carried sadness far too heavy for such small shoulders. Yet now she was looking at Martha as though she had been waiting for her all along. Caleb felt something painful loosen inside his chest. He realized this moment was no longer about finding a wife. It was about giving his daughter a chance to be a child again. Caleb looked at Martha Vance. He didn't see a thief or a liar standing there. He saw a woman who had survived her own blizzards. He saw a woman honest enough to tell a hard truth, even when a lie would have been easier to tell. She could have hidden her identity for weeks. For one long moment, Caleb said nothing at all. He wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Then he looked at his daughter's radiant face. He looked at the glowing horizon and then at Martha. Caleb finally smiled. It was the slow movement of a heart reopening. He reached out his rough, calloused hand. His palm was open and honest. "Well, Martha Vance," he said. His voice was finding its natural strength again. "The Bitterroot Valley is a big, lonely place.
There is room for one more soul in the silence. I reckon the wind won't be as loud with three of us. I'm Caleb, and this is Rosie. We've got a long ride ahead of us before dark." Martha looked at his hand. She saw the power in his work-worn fingers. She reached out and took it. Her grip was firm, solid, and certain. His hand felt like a mountain. It was immovable, steady, and warm. "I'm a good worker, Caleb," she promised. Her eyes searched his for any sign of regret. "I can cook, I can sew, and I can make a neglected house feel like home. I am truly not afraid of the hard work ahead." Caleb nodded. His heart felt strangely light for the first time in years. "Good," he said. "The Sterling Ranch offers plenty of work and a fine view." He picked up her trunk. He was surprised by how light it felt in his grasp. It told him everything about her life in the East. She had left nothing behind but the shadows of her past. They walked together toward the waiting wagon. They were a mismatched trio of souls seeking a home. The air smelled of pine, horse sweat, and fresh-cut timber. Missoula was growing quickly in those years. New brick buildings were rising like monuments to progress. The silver mines were booming in the nearby hills, but the ranchers were fighting for every inch of survival. They climbed into the high wagon seat.
Rosie was tucked safely in the middle. The little girl chattered as the horses began to trot. She talked about the red calf and the eagles. She talked about the creek that never dried up. Martha listened as if every word was a precious gem. She was collecting them like treasure in her heart. She didn't look at the mountains as a threat. She looked at them as a sacred promise kept by the earth. As they drove, the sun began its slow descent. It dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Range. The mountains turned a deep royal purple. The sky burned with a vibrant, bleeding orange. It felt like the fire of a new beginning. Caleb watched the road, yet he remained aware of the woman beside him. Something in the cool evening air felt unexpectedly right. The horse's hooves struck the dry earth with a rhythmic beat. It was the sound of a clock ticking toward a new life. They reached the ranch after the stars pierced the dark. The house was a small, sturdy log cabin. It was nestled in the shadow of a sheltering hill. It was built to withstand the rage of a Montana winter. But in the moonlight, it looked lonely and tired. Caleb lit the kerosene lanterns inside. The yellow light began to dance on the log walls. "It isn't much to look at yet," he said. He felt a sharp pang of shame for his poverty. The furniture was sparse and hand-hewn. The air smelled of wood smoke and old dust. Martha walked into the kitchen. She touched the cold iron of the heavy stove.
She saw the mountain of dirty plates in the dust. She saw the holes in the thin, ragged curtains. She saw the frayed edges of Rosie's small sweater. "It's a home," Martha said softly. She opened the tiny cupboard beside the stove. There were only a few jars of beans, a little flour, some dried herbs hanging from a beam. Nothing more. She quietly closed the cupboard without saying a word. Caleb noticed the movement. He expected disappointment. Instead, Martha smiled. "We already have everything that matters. We have a roof. We have honest work. And Rosie still believes tomorrow can be better." Her voice echoed gently in the cramped space. She turned to Caleb. Her eyes were shimmering in the warm lamplight. "Thank you for not sending me back to the cage." Caleb paused at the heavy wooden door. He looked out at the vast, silent night. "I've spent a lot of time waiting for things," he said. "I decided today that I'm done waiting for ghosts. I'm done waiting for Abigail." He went to the barn, seeking comfort in the familiar sounds of the horses. The animals shifted in their stalls, sensing a change in the air. The next morning, the real battle began. Martha didn't wait for permission to start her work.
She didn't ask for instructions on how to be useful. She found the heavy sack of flour in the pantry. She found fresh eggs from the coop behind the house. Soon, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It was a scent that had been forgotten in that house. Rosie sat at the table, completely mesmerized. She watched Martha's purposeful movements. Martha's hands were quick and skilled. She moved with the efficiency of a woman who had never known leisure. She sang a low, sweet melody as she needed. It was a song about endurance and the power of love. When Caleb came in, he stopped at the threshold. The table was scrubbed bone white. The morning sun poured into the room like gold. "Sit down and eat, Caleb," Martha said. Her tone was both kind and incredibly firm. They ate in a silence that was finally peaceful. It was the sound of a heart beginning to beat again. But peace in the Bitterroot was a fragile thing. A week later, a man rode into the yard. He was on a horse as black as a pool of ink. He wore a long coat of fine, expensive wool. His name was Arthur Thorne. He was a man who believed everything had a price. He owned the local bank and the surrounding land. He was a vulture circling a wounded animal. He wanted the water rights to the creek. That creek was the lifeblood of the entire valley. "Caleb," Thorne called out. His voice was sharp and full of cold authority.
Caleb stepped out into the blinding sun. His face turned to mountain stone in an instant. "Run out of people to threaten today?" Caleb asked. "I hear you have a guest," Thorne said. He was peering intently toward the porch. Martha stood there holding a broom. Her eyes were fixed on the man in black. She recognized that look of predatory greed. She had seen it in the mill owners back east. "I hear you brought a bride to this wilderness. Is she the school teacher from the city?" Thorne smiled a cold, predatory smile. "Her name is Martha," Caleb said. The lie came to his lips with a protective ease. He knew the words could cost him dearly. He would not let Thorne speak of her as property. "She is my wife, and she is the heart of this ranch." Thorne laughed, a dry and hollow sound. "A wife? Mr. Sterling, I have your files. Your payments are late and your cattle are dead. The station master says this woman is an imposter. She arrived under another passenger's ticket." Caleb stepped forward, his shadow falling over the horse. "If your claim is built on fraud, the bank takes it all. When you cannot pay, the creek becomes mine." "I work this dirt with my own blood," Caleb growled. "You're one bad month from the poorhouse," Thorne said. "Sell me the water rights now, and I'll let you go."
"My father built this ranch with his bare hands. I'll die in this dirt before you touch my water." Thorne tipped his hat mockingly. "The court hearing is in 3 weeks. Have your papers ready, Mr. Sterling." He rode away, leaving a cloud of bitter dust. Rosie wrapped both arms around Martha's skirt. Martha gently rested a hand on the girl's hair. Caleb stood alone in the heavy silence. His shoulders slumped under the crushing weight. Martha walked down the steps to his side. "He is a dangerous man," she said. "He is a greedy man," Caleb corrected her. "Greed is far worse than danger in this country. Greed is a hunger that never stops eating." Martha looked at the sparkling clear creek. "He wants to kill this land to fill a ledger." Caleb looked at her with heavy eyes. "I shouldn't have lied to him, Martha. Now you're caught in my failing war." Martha touched his sleeve with a firm hand. "I became part of this fight the moment you welcomed me into your home. Let him come with his lawyers and his threats. We will find a way to stand our ground together." That night, Caleb sat on the porch. The coyotes sang lonely songs to the moon. He thought about the wrong bride. He thought about how she protected Rosie. He realized he didn't want Abigail anymore.
He wanted the woman with the courage to claim a new life. He wanted the woman who wasn't afraid of the wind. The following days were a blur of shared labor. Sometimes Caleb caught himself watching her without meaning to. She laughed whenever Rosie splashed water from the creek. She talked gently to frightened horses. Even the old sheepdog chose to sleep beside the kitchen door again. The ranch somehow felt alive. Nothing about the buildings had changed, only the people inside them had. Martha worked harder than any man Caleb knew. She mended broken fences with a heavy hammer. She planted a garden in the rocky soil. She delivered a calf in a lightning storm. She never complained about the Montana mud. She was strong, gentle, and utterly essential. She was the glue holding the crumbling ranch together.
She looked at him with raw, unguarded honesty. "I am not the saint you are promised." Caleb put down the saddle and walked to her. "Martha," he said softly in the golden light, "none of us are who we thought we'd be. I thought I was a failure after the winter. I thought I was a ghost after Sarah died. But then you showed up at that station. You brought music back to a silent house. You taught my daughter how to laugh again. You taught me how to hope when I was ready to quit." He took her hard-working hands into his own. "You aren't running anymore, Martha. You are finally home." Martha began to cry, quiet, heavy tears. They were the tears of a woman who had finally been seen. Caleb pulled her into his arms. He held her against the vast Montana night. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The wind moved quietly through the pine trees. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Martha wondered whether this peace would disappear by morning. Caleb seemed to sense her fear. "If we lose the ranch," he whispered, "I'll build another cabin with my own hands. If we lose the cattle, I'll raise more. If we lose every dollar," he looked into her eyes, "I still won't lose you." Martha closed her eyes.
No one had ever chosen her over comfort before. The day of the court hearing arrived. Missoula was crowded, dusty, and tense. The courthouse was a fortress of red brick. It represented the encroaching law of the East. Caleb wore his best coat, though it was tight. Martha wore her blue dress, ironed perfectly. She had braided Rosie's hair with a blue ribbon. They walked into the courtroom as one. Arthur Thorne sat in the front row. His lawyer clutched a stack of legal papers. Judge Miller presided over the room with a frown. "Mr. Sterling," the judge began, "your land claim is being contested. Mr. Thorne claims your household is a fraud." Caleb stood up, his voice ringing with dignity. "I have shed my blood on that ranch for 10 years. This woman is Martha, and she is my partner." Thorne sneered from his seat. "Where is the marriage license, Sterling? The station master says she's a drifter. She arrived under a stolen name." The courtroom erupted in whispers and judgment. Several townspeople quietly nodded. Most of them had already heard Arthur Thorne's version of the story days before the hearing. A woman in the front row hissed the word fraud. Martha's face went pale under the scrutiny. She felt the old cage closing in on her.
Then a small hand slipped into hers. Rosie was squeezing her fingers tight. "You are my mama," Rosie said clearly. The room went silent at the child's voice. The judge looked down at the little girl. "Little one," he said gently, "do you know what a mama is?" Rosie looked at Thorne with fire in her eyes. "A mama is the person who fixes my heart. She's the one who stayed when I was afraid. She stayed when the wind was loud. You can't take our mama away. You can't do it just to take our water." The judge cleared his throat and looked at Caleb. "Do you intend to make this woman your wife?" Caleb looked at Martha and saw his entire future. "I would have married her the day she arrived. I was just too slow to see she was my miracle." Martha stepped forward with unwavering pride. "I took a seat on a train that wasn't mine, but I have earned this life with my heart. I love that child as if she were my own. If you take that ranch, you bury me in it." The judge looked at Thorne, then at the family. "The law was made to build a territory," he said. "It was not made to help bankers steal. I see a family standing here today. I will grant a stay of 30 days. Return with a lawful marriage certificate and sworn household testimony. Until the bank provides a full accounting of the debt, the water rights will remain with the Sterling Ranch."
Arthur Thorne gathered his papers in silence. He walked out of the courtroom alone. The room erupted in cheers from the local ranchers. Caleb and Martha didn't wait for the morning. They went to the little white church. They spoke their vows with steady voices. "I, Caleb, take you, Martha. I, Martha, take you, Caleb." When he kissed his wife, it was a promise kept. Rosie clapped her tiny hands so hard they turned red. She ran straight into Martha's arms. "Can I call you Mama forever now?" Martha could not answer. She simply nodded through her tears. Caleb smiled. That single word meant more than every promise they had spoken inside the church. They drove the wagon back to the ranch. The sun was setting over the Bitterroot Peaks. The shadows didn't feel lonely anymore. They felt like a blanket for the weary. That night, they sat on the porch together. Rosie was asleep inside, her new blue ribbon resting beside the bed. Caleb reached into his pocket for a gold band. "This was my mother's ring," he said. He slid it onto Martha's finger in the moonlight. "It fits perfectly," she whispered. She leaned her head against his steady shoulder. "Because it finally found the right hand," Caleb said. The winters would still be hard in Montana. The work would be never-ending and brutal. But the house no longer felt empty or cold. The wrong bride was the heart of the home. Caleb squeezed Martha's hand and didn't let go. They were home beneath the vast eternal sky. For the first time in years, the world was right. If this story touched your heart, tell us where you are listening from today. Subscribe for more stories of courage, family, and Wild West love. This story is a work of historical fiction inspired by life in the American West. Some names, dialogue, events, and timelines have been created or adapted for storytelling purposes. Visuals may be created or enhanced using artificial intelligence and digital artistry.